We have spoken a lot on Awaken with my colleague who you met, David. We've talked a lot about the masculine running amok, and that's what you just touched on, that a lot of these problems is just that excess of masculine energy, that mistaken idea that we can somehow pillage and plunder and it's ours to do what we want. And it sounds like you would agree with that.
I would agree with that, with the one caveat that what is it about enabling and codependence that 3.75 billion females on the planet don't understand? So, in other words, nobody gets out of this.
Mm.
Okay, and it's not about women blaming men for
Right.
creating a problem, but that we are codependently in lockstep creating it. Now, I'm not saying that men couldn't use a couple of lessons in being a little less dominant and allowing their own feminine, but I think we all have to get ownership here.
It's an energetic kind of, we're stuck in this momentum.
A energetic dynamic that feeds upon itself.
Yes.
And so in order to come out, like Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem from within the same
Space
frame
or level, right.
you know, and so we're going to have to understand that and rise above the entire situation in order for our evolution to continue, or we're going to have to extinguish all life and start over again and let the earth cool off for a few million years, and that's another option. And quite frankly, that's part of the natural process that happens anyway. I mean, whether we do it now or later.
Right.
I can always remember one of my spiritual teachers long ago wrote, well, God's kind of in a position where it's, he says, well, or she says, she says, well, you can pay me now or you can pay me later.
Yes, the earth will regenerate with or without us.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I want to ask you, can you speak about the meat industry? It seems like that part of the cause of global warming is pushed under the carpet. And I was grateful for the movie that Leo DiCaprio backed, Cowspiracy, for bringing that out into the open. Could you speak about that?
Sure. Well, I was also a producer on a movie called Racing Extinction, and which was directed by Louis C. Hoyos, who won the Oscar for The Cove. And this movie was quite significant and went around the world on Discovery in 2015. And we lit up the Empire State Building and drew attention to the issue.
Nice.
By putting species that are imperiled and going extinct in front of the human race. But we did address that issue in the film. Basically, the human meat industry accounts for all the cattle, chicken, hogs, everything, all in, accounts for more methane and greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector.
Wow.
All the buses and airplanes combined.
Wow.
More than that. But that's a calculation that also takes into account cutting down the rainforest in order to grow feed for the cattle,
Right.
et cetera. You have to do a full inventory, whole systems thinking, cradle to cradle. And so we put that film out there, and I appreciate Cowspiracy also. But to think that we could take the human race and turn everybody into vegans is pretty much wishful thinking. There's too much, there's just hundreds of thousands of years of genetics involved here. You can't take the Lakota Indians and make them into vegetarians when they've been hunting buffalo for most of their existence, except for the last 150 years. But that said, we certainly could benefit from a vastly increased plant diet. We all know this, medically, spiritually, physically, energetically. It would make a huge difference on reducing our carbon footprint. So we have to think of the solution in terms of these various wedges that Pakala and Sokolov introduced 15 years ago. And so if we aggregate all of these solutions, then we can really solve the problem. So yes, reducing our meat intake and reducing and shifting. I mean, just if we cut out beef and just ate chicken, it would be an enormous step forward in terms of the greenhouse gas, just from that perspective. Never mind the health issues of why chicken is better. And I'm sorry to all the chickens, but we really need to get off of the fish because we're eating every last one of them, and we're crashing all of the species in the oceans. But there's so many other places that we can reduce our carbon footprint that we could probably talk for a couple hours just about that.
Well, it seems like the obstacle is just too overwhelming. I'm remembering when Oprah had Howard Lyman, the farmer turned vegetarian, on her show, and she got sued by the cattle farmers just for acknowledging the problem that the industry is. Is that changing at all? Are people becoming more wise to what's going on to the point where the cattle industry can't stand up to that opposition anymore?
I think that, we have a litigious society that's based on monetary interests. And so anybody who's threatened is going to call their lawyer and try to continue to maintain the status quo. But we're also reaching, critical mass in terms of breakdown. So there's really no way to continue to feed humanity when we're running out of water and the weather patterns are shifting such that we're now running out of food. And China is starting to buy the U.S. grain crop again, and India, the same thing. So we're really on the edge of catastrophic collapse, and it's not, just climate. The climate is the source of it, but then what that does is that extrapolates down to, forcing farmers off their land into the cities of Syria, as an example, 6 years ago, and the start of the civil war over there. When people can't eat and they can't drink, they start to migrate. It's also what forced the immigration crisis that we're experiencing, the migration crisis that we're experiencing in Europe, which ultimately, I think, led to Brexit and possibly to the election in the United States in 2016.
So it seems like the obvious is, it's the elephant in the room kind of a thing. It's the population control, and nobody wants to go there. Would you say that we can't really face this challenge of this magnitude without addressing the fundamental issue of population?
I'd say that that's correct, that we have to address the issue of population. And obviously, the best way to do that is the education of women and girls in third countries and developing countries, and giving them their reproductive power, such they're not just subject to the will of the male element.
Yes.
And the desire to procreate, constantly, which is blowing our population out. I mean, everybody wants to have a family. I understand that. But we've got to come to terms with there's simply too many of us the way that we're doing it. Now, if we had listened to Buckminster Fuller back when he was, active in the 50s and 60s, we wouldn't have to be sitting here because the planet could easily sustain 20 billion human beings if we were doing it correctly. Not. We're basing it on the burning of oil, which of course is life. It's what life becomes, to finish that metaphor that we started.
Yes.
This is the point, is that the oil, the coal, and the gas are all of the old life. And so, to use what we become as short-term energy gain for money and power, mostly the power to power modern society and, give us our iPhones and our computers and everything else that we're utilizing, we're paying a big price for that. And it's coming down in the terms of the decimation of the great herds of elephants and lions and all of the species that are flaming out before our very eyes right now.
Heartbreaking.
It's very tragic.
Are you optimistic? And I was reading about your program called Startup Green. You also have a summit that meets in Aspen, is it?
Right.
Could you tell me about some practical solutions? What are you doing, and what can we as ordinary people do? Because it sounds daunting. Of course, it is daunting.
Right. So here's the good news. I mean, as Al Gore says, we have to always look at the solution, and we always have hope. And the hope is that we will come to our senses and that we can make more money by consuming less energy. And so that's what Startup Green is about. That's a program within the AREI, but the R Day Summit, where we gather thought leaders. We've had great success since 2004 when we began. Ted Turner has been to the summit 5 times, but so is T. Boone Pickens. And so while Ted Turner may represent the extreme left and T. Boone the extreme right, they come together in the middle on the extreme green.
Nice.
Which is, I like to say, the color of money and trees.
Well, that's the thing. People think that money and prosperity depends on the status quo. But if it can be shown that change can be equally prosperous, well, that's what's going to talk. And
Right.
it sounds like that's what you're doing, showing companies how they can create sustainable practices.
We're interested in connecting the economy and the environment, and that's the nexus.
Wonderful.
And we're also interested in facilitating an ecological economy. Very important. What if our world was based on the gross national product of planting more trees, growing more fish, increasing species instead of reducing them, while simultaneously reducing our carbon footprint? And what if our monetary value was based on that? That's the transition that we have to go to. I know it sounds utopian and impossible, but believe it or not, it's quite doable, and renewable energy is actually the bridge to get there. And even though we burn carbon to manufacture our solar panels and manufacture our Teslas and Chevy Volts, and but the inefficiencies within the system are so vast that there's great wealth to be created in this transition and fixing the problem. It's the greatest wealth creation opportunity that will ever face humanity. Quoting my good friend and colleague Jigar Shah, who wrote a book by the same title, Creating Climate Wealth.
Wonderful. Have there been any success stories, companies who have successfully moved to a more sustainable way of practicing, of doing business, of operating?
Many, many, many good stories.
Can you share some?
Ray Anderson, the CEO of Interface Carpet, was absolutely determined to take his most carbon-intensive carpet manufacturing at a industrial scale for the commercial sector of apartments and commercial buildings around the world, and making his company 100% carbon neutral and renewable. He almost got there. He passed away about 5 years ago. But Interface is a great story. I would put your attention to an organization called the B Team, led by my colleague Keith Tuffley, who has some of the world's leading CEOs as members, starting with Richard Branson, but also including Mark Benioff, and from Salesforce, Arianna Huffington is a member of the B Team. Even Andy Liveris, who's the CEO of Dow Chemical. There are 20 or 30 companies involved, and they're all internally, through the corporate structure and governance at the board levels, looking at how to self-impose carbon taxes and reductions, looking at how do they make more money by burning less fossils, and they're increasing their bottom line by hundreds and tens of millions of dollars. And so there's a lot of really, really good bright spots out there. Just because our leaders in Washington don't believe in climate change or don't want to believe in it doesn't mean that science can be avoided or ignored. And the reality is upon us, and there's many, many corporate leaders out there that are in the midst of the great transition, is what we call it, from fossil to renewable. I'd also want to cite some of the big companies like Google, Amazon.
What are they doing?
They're making large server farms, and they're creating solar to drive that. So they're moving off of fossils, and they're saving money and adding to their bottom line throughout the entire value chain.
So these will be the role models for other young businesses that you can make a successful transition to a more sustainable way of doing business and still be profitable.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And I guess, I would want to, end our session with some comments about the shift that it's going to take in consciousness to get there.
Please do. Please, if you'd like to share anything before we close with the Awaken community, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, so I think that in terms of the evolution of man and how our brains have evolved in terms of our basic needs, food, water, shelter, love, we're now hitting a place where our consciousness is going to have to take a great leap forward in order for us to survive what we're experiencing coming at us. And I think that that goes towards new ways of looking at our relationships in our families of origin with our loved ones, but then also our communities, and that just translates right up through regionally, our states, our nations, and then into the global context. There's 195 countries on the planet, and that this shift in consciousness, which is absolutely mandated, in fact, I would dare say being forced upon us by ourselves, is part of the evolution of the human oversoul, or however you want to say what we all are in aggregate, and that the human spirit is here to receive this lesson and to overcome these obstacles that are self-imposed, but then to move into the next great enlightenment. And so that's why we're seeing, the yoga expansion all over the country in the last 10 years. Meditation practices in all various types and forms have been expanding wildly as people begin to look in and try to understand the need for us to move out of a fear-based consciousness and fully into a love-based consciousness. That really, I think there's only two choices in the universe, and that's what it is. So as we make this transition from fear to love, we're going to have to apply that into our physical world. And I think that that's probably, why we all came to Earth.
Thank you so much for speaking of that connection between our spiritual growth and this shift that needs to happen in our world. It's all interrelated, and I'm so grateful that you made that connection. And I'm also thankful for your time. Thank you for sharing the good work that you're doing with Air Day with our listeners. We appreciate it.